So here's the thing about Edie Britt from Desperate Housewives. She's an icon, she's a legend, and she is the moment.
Now come on now.
And even though her character was often treated as an adversary, a lot of the people in the fanbase actually adore this character and feel she deserved much better than she got, one of them being me. But despite the fact that she is absolutely hilarious and is responsible for some of the wildest antics and best jokes on the lane, she also happens to be one of the most tragic characters in the entire series, in my own opinion. Because we see really up close with her the effect of loneliness. Although her promiscuity is often played for laughs and Mary Alice straight up calls her a slut in episode 1,
Susan had met the enemy, and she was a slut.
it was difficult for me to watch her constant yearning for connection and subsequent failure to receive it whenever she attempted. And yes, there are many times where the relationship didn't work out in part due to her own actions, but her resulting rising desperation to find someone to love her was only ever devastating to me, even when she was presented as an adversary for our main characters. In the first season, she's portrayed as someone who's encroaching on Susan's crusade for Mike and almost interrupting true love, when in reality, she's just looking for the same thing. Edie is first presented as a foil to Susan, someone who has the same goals, to find someone who truly loves and cares for them, but embarks on the endeavor utilizing entirely different methods. And I firmly believe that's why they're always at odds with one another, that they're actually very similar at heart, but different on the surface, and they can use that to separate themselves, refusing to admit that they see a lot of their own flaws in one another. In fact, my favorite moments of this series are when these two are able to put aside their differences and overcome their often trivial squabbles, supporting each other as women and only resolving to lift each other up. And while yes, I do think this show definitely suffers from inconsistently written relationships, every single reconciliation and conversation with understanding that they had gave me so much joy. I think overall it was a wonderful thing to see on television, especially considering how textured their story resolves itself. And even when they were quarreling with one another, usually by the end of the episode, one of them would admit how terribly they've been acting and at least learn and grow from the experience. Susan and Edie would not nearly be as developed as they were by the end of their time in the series had they not come into contact with each other. Killing off Edie was certainly a choice, but it was at least nice that they tied a few ribbons on her relationships to give us some closure on the two. Not only do Edie and Susan make up and end up providing each other with incredible advice that sets the other on a totally different trajectory. After her death, Susan resolves to respect Edie and her effect on the lane, realizing just how great a friend she was, even with her mistakes, and regretting that she wasted so many years being enemies with her when they really just could have been friends the whole time, which I appreciated even after all of those kind of hackneyed Susan versus Edie storylines. Edie's had affairs with many different men, and while the perception on the street is that she's using all these men, or simply greedy, or overindulgent, Edie is ultimately looking for the same thing that Susan is, albeit very differently. It's not as thoughtless as many would have you, or Susan would, believe. She's having fun with these men to replace the need she has inside her heart for someone to truly hold her, care for her, and love her. Not to say that these are totally meaningless relationships, but they are generally one-off, one-night stands, and Edie kind of prefers it that way for a lot of those men. Because she has been married twice before the series starts, both of them not working out, she's been truly hurt, and when we meet her, she's in a phase where she's looking for real love, but in the meantime is simply having fun, because she can't afford to waste a second of her life, for reasons that I will dive into later. But however, this reason is also why she's heavily disliked on the lane throughout the series. She has a tendency to link up with the former husbands or boyfriends, and the evidence is quite damning. I mean, Carl, Mike, Carlos, Orson. I'm convinced Rex would have been on that list if he lived long enough. But you have to consider why she does go after these men, despite knowing full well that it is wrong. That is something I always considered when she would end up with someone's ex-something. Looking for love is an exhausting endeavor, and Edie has been married multiple times. She's tried with immense gestures to form romantic bonds and has consistently failed, and in turn been hurt, forced to retreat back into her hypersexual behavior to keep feeling loved and valued until she can find a man who will be there for the rest of her life. As a result, she doesn't really look any gift horse in the mouth when it comes to her partners or potential partners, even if that possibility comes from the direct end of one of her dear friends' marriages or relationships. Edie does prioritize her own happiness over theirs. And while I don't agree with her making a move on some of these men, I do at the very least understand it. And while this is a natural tendency and pressure for any human, after all we are social creatures, to form a permanent bond before it's, quote, too late, also a concept that doesn't really exist in my mind, this is even more so enforced upon women. I talked about this in one of my earlier video essays, but the spinster stereotype in older American times was viewed as the ultimate failure, something that women should aspire to avoid, even if those spinsters, as they called them, had found true happiness without a husband by their side. You know, the cliched cat lady who I don't know why people ever look down on living in a house full of cats. Kind of sounds like a dream to me, but I don't know, maybe that's just preference. As opposed to the single bachelor stereotype, which is often lauded or praised in media. And we're getting better at differentiating these two and accepting choices to not settle down and have a family, which is not required for any human to do. I do still think it is ingrained in how children are raised and contributes to a lot of behavior later in life. There is a pressure, a need put upon the heads of women from their childhood to find someone, marry, and make their life worth something. I mean, hell, single women and married women have even had fundamentally different rights. Deviating from the norm of growing into a wife and mother earns scorn, and the fear of ostracization could cause many women to fall back in line with those expectations. I fully believe that Edie could have found ultimate happiness without a man in her life, and likely would have enjoyed continuing the casual interactions she was known to have at the beginning of the series. Who's to say that those are inherently wrong? The women of Wisteria Lane are just judgy. If they make her happy and don't lead to emotional turmoil, why not pursue that lifestyle that leads to a higher amount of happiness and fulfillment? I think Edie would be incredibly valid for doing that. But due to this, Edie often felt that she needed to find a husband so that she could avoid the possibility of leaving her life alone, which was clearly one of her greatest fears, that we saw in depth when she was dreaming about her mother while she was manipulating Carlos into being with her. And although she does go after these men who she perhaps should not be pursuing, the methods she uses to keep them in her life are also extreme as hell and only get more so as the series goes on, especially with Carlos at the end of season 3. I mean, she fakes wanting to have a baby with him so that he'll stay after trying to manipulate her own child and getting joint custody just to get Carlos to stay. And then when he finds out and finally breaks up with her, she fakes a suicide. Like, that is wild. And while, yes, I was frustrated with Edie after she faked hanging herself, that act is so insanely desperate that obviously Edie is not mentally well anyway. Even though she isn't trying to actually kill herself, someone who is doing okay does not do that. She is willing to exhort to extreme measures to keep these men in her life because that fear of being alone is so strong, likely because of what she experienced with her childhood, which I will address even more later. This frantic search eventually leads to her death when she meets Dave Williams, who ultimately uses her as a tool for his revenge plot against Mike and Susan for inadvertently killing his wife and daughter. She's so willing to accept this very quick marriage as her falling in love, this fairy tale that she's always dreamed about. She even states herself that she wanted to believe Dave when he said that they could be happy in Fairview, and lied to her about his ulterior motives. She ignored that part of herself, telling her that it wasn't realistic, in the hope that she had finally found what she had always been looking for. And she was willing to look past many of the red flags she saw while they began their relationship. Not to mention, a lot of them don't pop up until after they're already married, showing how quickly they rushed into this very intense commitment. But she's willing to forgive a lot when it comes to Dave, even when he acts completely erratic. While I do applaud Edie for being more understanding to Dave's mental health issues, her not requiring him to get some actual professional help before continuing or resuming their relationship was definitely a mistake, especially when she's already seen him talking to ghosts and acting extremely irrational on several separate occasions. He is clearly not ready for a serious relationship right now. But it's so awful to rewatch season 5 and see her nearly escape escape from this relationship, but turn back to Dave just before the fatal night because she really does crave that something real. And even if she didn't truly believe Dave's motives for moving, she did believe her own feelings toward him. Her night with Susan helping to realize them and resulting in their reconciliation. And for what it's worth, I think her intuition was correct in that Dave cares for her and loved her as well. It's just, he's not mentally well either. Both things can be true. And just to be clear, is any of this Edie's fault? No, not at all. I do not mean to blame her. Merely explain how her desperate search for true love eventually led to her demise, which is one of the most tragic things about her character to me. But this loneliness, it isn't even just romantic either. She struggles to form bonds with those around her from the beginning of the show and already feels on the outside with the main female characters of our series. Martha Huber is the only one who shows her any sort of compassion, and not only is she fucking murdered soon after, she also fucking sucks. Edie is willing to accept this rather toxic friendship because she was completely ostracized from the rest of the neighborhood. It is extensively covered in this series that Martha Huber was not a great person or friend. Did she deserve to die? Of course not. But even her sister admits that she was flat out terrible to those around her, and her sister cared about her more than anybody else in this series did. She criticized everything about Edie, slut-shamed her just like the other women of the neighborhood did, and was just outright rude and petty and stole. The only reason they were friends was because Martha Huber has no boundaries. Like none whatsoever, and was willing to actually approach Edie. But this is just another illustration about how desperate Edie was for connection on this street in her life. When she's actually alive, Edie and Martha have so many arguments and very few positive interactions. But when they characterize their friendship later that season, they do a great job highlighting why Edie was so enamored with her in the first place. Sometimes all it takes is for someone to listen and acknowledge you. And in an effort to get closer to the main girl, full-on blackmails Bree, which is honestly so in character for her. But she doesn't build relationships based on trust because she fundamentally cannot trust those around her to accept her. Therefore, she feels the need to resort to these outwardly negative and predatory actions to force people into a relationship with her. I've linked a study below that details how loneliness can actually affect brain function and leads chemically to less trust in those around them. Like literally there is an observed reduced response to positive behavior in real life in those who exhibit high levels of loneliness, and chemically less oxytocin released, which leads to empathetic tendencies and closer bonds with loved ones. And it's also observed that they naturally have lower amounts of interpersonal trust between their peers. Therefore, it's reasonable to assume that those who are socially ostracized would subsequently be more likely to resort to underhanded methods to secure friendship, and for their worldview to be rather distorted when it comes to forming bonds with others. I mean, once Edie gets blackmail over Bree, the only thing she really asks for is, like, basic friendship stuff. The baking is a little bit over the top, I will admit, but basically she just wants Bree to be her best friend. So they naturally distrust her, so there must have been some catalyst for them to be able to become friends with each other, Edie figures, and decides to create that catalyst herself. And after season 1, where Martha Huber is murdered, she doesn't really have anyone constant in her life that she can depend on and talk to. She's on and off with the girls, Carl, Carlos. We know that her father left long ago and her mother's passed away, so Edie really does have no one. And it was so heartbreaking to see her break down when spreading Martha's ashes with Susan, especially knowing as the audience that Susan wasn't really there to comfort or support her in any way. And her severe retaliation makes a lot of sense. I think even though throwing the remains of another person in someone's face is wild behavior, that's why so many are on her side here, and in her other battles with Susan, especially since they're able to make up so many times. It always conveys Edie's willingness to accept friendships that might not be particularly stable, and shows that she really does yearn for genuine connection, and it just makes you feel worse when people are kind of using her or lying to her, which does happen quite often throughout the show. But the smartest thing this show does is reveal that she's always felt this way too. She even describes her high school experience as largely the same, where she did not connect to many and felt largely apart from the whole of the student body. She has, for her entire life, had trouble opening up to those around her in a natural way, and developed a habit for keeping those around her at arm's length, for fear that they might not accept her for who she truly is. And even when she lets them in after years of trying to keep them away, like with Susan, she often finds that they had an ulterior motive to supporting her, causing that distrust in others only to rise and for her to resort to more extreme methods in the future, rather than, simple passive aggressiveness or guilting people into things. Classic techniques learned from the one and only Martha Hubert. This cycle repeats for most of the series, both for her friendships and her romantic relationships, where she tries to trick Carl into staying with her, manipulates Carlos into being in a relationship with her 2 separate times, blackmails Bree to earn friendship, and she just grows more and more erratic as the series goes on, and just as she's about to find the stability she always craved, she loses her life. That is tragedy to me. Another reason this character is so tragic is her past. Edie reveals what occurred in her childhood late in the series, very close to the point where she leaves it, but honestly, I think they did a great job of contextualizing her actions and her overall personality through what she endured when she was a young girl. Her mother passed away in a nursing home before the series begins, and her father left their family when she was still very young, selfishly taking some of Edie's precious belongings as he did so. And Edie states herself that this instilled in her a natural distrust of men, which is why she treats some of her male relationships so cavalierly or struggles to trust those that she's currently with and resorts to those underhanded methods that I spoke about before. Especially after that trust is taken for granted so many separate times, like with Carl or Carlos, who both cheat on her. She has a caution to her love life that many others don't approach with. And although she knows what she wants, she struggles to let people in to be able to secure it, which is why she has so many short-term affairs with men. She doesn't want to give them the opportunity to work their way past her thick walls into her heart and truly hurt her. I saw this most evidently when we see her treat her relationship as if it's a war. Carl just walks in and turns off what she's watching without asking, claiming that some sport game is important to him, even though he just trampled over something Edie was genuinely enjoying. So rather than try to explain her feelings, knowing that men in general wouldn't listen to her, she tricks him into going upstairs and getting tied to the bed. Not to mention that he immediately gave up on the game when she offered sex, so yeah, seems real important to you. God, I cannot stand the husbands on this show. But the reason why Edie is so iconic to so many people is because she finds solutions like this, clever ways to solve her problems, even though that, yes, this is definitely a surefire way to start problems in your relationship. Overall, hearing about her experiences with men throughout her entire life provides an excellent context for Edie's actions throughout the show. And while I don't think her father messed her up, as Susan thinking that got her smacked, I do think he provided fuel for the cynicism that permeates her relationships later in life. And I do think that a lot of the time she is with men, there is a natural distrust that is there, which is why she goes to all of these extravagant plans to be able to keep men, or stays in relationships where she genuinely just doesn't seem happy. It's so weird when her and Carl are together in season 2 after she discovers about the whole insurance fraud thing, because her and Carl kind of both just seem miserable, and then he proposes. It's like an entire mess, and you wonder why she wouldn't leave him, and is so upset when he leaves, even when she wasn't remotely joyous in that relationship at all. Since there's that natural distrust, I feel like, and because she feels she needs the relationship, she's willing to accept more than she should be. And another thing about this character that is utterly tragic is that she knew she would die young. Honestly, this fact that is presented in the episode where she passes on is one of the most depressing things about her character to me.
That's the tricky part. I'm not gonna be old. Ever since I was a child, I've known that I was never going to see 50. As far back as I can remember, a voice in my head said, live it up today, because you're not going to have a lot of tomorrows.
She literally never intended or suspected that she would be able to live a long time, and it explains so much of her behavior and how she attempted to gain the most satisfaction possible in the short time that she was given. I do think, while it isn't, of course, possible she'd know she would die young, this is a good representation of the pressure women feel to find value only while they're of a certain age. A concept that this show does address with many other characters as well, and that they do a very good job of portraying the emotional effect effective. It also does a great job of characterizing her actions that were perhaps not very moral as an effort to grab as much enjoyment out of life as possible, which doesn't make them okay, but it does make them much more understandable. One of the biggest actions being the fact that she left her son behind and gave up custody. In the episode where she passes on, we get a flashback where she explains that she feels she would not be able to change and be a good mother to Travers, even though we are also shown when we see her with her kid that she does love him a great deal. She feels that she doesn't have enough time to be able to change and therefore should not be a part of Travers' life lest she raise him incorrectly. I do think this can be a convenient excuse for people who don't want to put effort into changing. I am who I am and nothing will change that, so why should I bother? But Edie almost having a timer on her life would only definitely enhance that feeling of not being able to change in any meaningful way before their life is over. And also adds to her choice of, I have decided that I am going to live my life to the fullest, and if I am going to do that, it is not responsible for me to have a child, which I do understand and agree that it makes her a realistic mother, not a particularly amazing one. And as she does state in her last real line, she is ready to move on, ready to give up her life. She feels satisfied. She says directly, it's not hard to die when you know that you've lived. She spent her entire life doing what she knew she enjoyed, living her truth, and although she didn't particularly find the love that she may have wanted, she didn't have any regrets on the way out, and I admire her a great deal for persevering and living the life that she always wanted to, even if she wasn't the model person. Then again, what character in this show is? It's extremely satisfying, even though it is a tragic exit, to see Edie look back on her life and realize that she had a good one, and she genuinely appreciated everything that she did, and is proud of many of the decisions that she made. But if you agree, let me know in the comments below, and also if you enjoyed this video, let us know by supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/PosiTVty to get extra content in the form of unedited essays and all of these videos before they come out on here, but also supporting us on YouTube means a whole lot. Please discuss further in the comments. We love to hear from you. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell. I always forget that one. Forget about that stupid bell. And yeah, that helps our channel though, so yeah, do that. Let us know what you'd want to see next. We are always open to suggestions, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.